Hi everyone, good seeing you all again. So I'll be talking about how we institutionalize embodied carbon for our municipal projects. I'm with SF Environment, Senior Circular Economy Coordinator. Next slide. Dive right into it. So I'll be zooming out a bit from the project specific to talk about our climate action plan, because that's where everything flows from. And then from there, discuss sort of our policies and programs that deal with circular construction and embodied carbon. And then as we implement over the years, learn lessons to share with you all. Next slide. So in 2021, we have a climate action plan, as all of you have had. Next slide. And with that, we establish and measure our emission reduction target. So I want to start with this as sort of obligatory, but it helps shape our embodied carbon story. And next slide, please. So you all have done the sector-based emissions inventory, which sort of, in the case of San Francisco, is sort of boundary clipped. You see our geographical boundaries and our emissions typically only measure what happens in our boundaries. Next slide. And so you've seen these as well. So in our sector-based emissions inventory, about 4.1 million metric tons, with transportation and buildings being the largest emitters. Next slide. But as we know, there's an opportunity in the global supply chain. That's kind of what we're here for, and specifically looking at materials and the infinite supply chain that we have across this globe. Next slide. So when we launched our climate action plan in 2021, we established a consumption-based emissions inventory. And so our actual emissions opportunity is about 13 million metric tons, and we delineate it by looking at product categories, as you see there in the wedges. Next slide. So that increases our emissions opportunity. I'm not going to say emissions to 3 times more. That is, we as a city and sort of the economic center of Northern California have this opportunity to influence emissions beyond our geographical boundaries. Next slide. So from that, in 2020, we established a consumption-based emissions target, actually codified it in our environment code. So top row, you see our standard sector-based emissions inventory. Today, we're almost at 50%. We have a 2030 interim target at 61%, and then we're going to go to net zero by 2040. The consumption-based emission target had teed up all our work here and said, okay, today we're at 11%. We have a long way to go. But fortunately, there's a lot of movement right now. So we're hoping to get to 40% reduction by 2030. And we established a 2050 target at 80% reduction. So that's codified. Next slide. In our climate action plan, we had 7 major chapters you see there, and as you saw it animating on the left side down there, it was called Responsible Production and Consumption at the time. We're reframing it as circular economy today. Next slide. And we're in the middle of the climate action plan update. So we're looking at actions and strategies we could take from 2025 to 2030. So everything I'm presenting moving forward is sort of still in the works and not finalized. But I wanted to share with everyone what we're thinking regarding embodied carbon and circular construction. Next slide. Doing the consumption-based emissions inventory allowed us to hone into product categories and develop particular strategies around buildings and infrastructure, food, good materials and services, aviation. At SFO, we own and operate SFO. And then our last strategy there is somewhat new, is our develop a circular economy roadmap. Next slide. I wanted to hone in on the top one, which was the buildings and infrastructure. But shout out to all my operational and decarb and electrification people. The how we do this, you already created the blueprint, right? From the first step, we've been advocating based on our policy and identifying our data gaps, if not process gaps. We innovate and we demonstrate success and opportunities, particularly with our partners and so leadership, and we collaborate with each other. And then we start implementing those policies and programs and projects that actually deliver based on learned lessons. So when we're doing this embodied carbon work, I've always point to that blueprint and feel like this could be successful. Next slide. In San Francisco, just honing in here on buildings, particularly non-residential or commercial buildings, we have lead requirements. And if I'm just going to focus in on municipal projects, we've had lead gold requirements for quite a while. And basically, it's the same things you see Cal Green Pathways compliance, looking at reuse, LCA, and looking at material EPDs. Next slide. And going back to the climate action plan here, our strategy, when we refer to it as circular economy, first strategy is to implement circular, low carbon, safe, and healthy construction processes and materials across the buildings and infrastructure sectors. Very climate action plan speak. Basically, it says reduce carbon and do in a safe and healthy way with materials in our processes. You have 9 actions there in the table, and all covering a range of new buildings, existing buildings, looking at LCA, adaptive reuse, our municipal projects, policies we could set citywide, as well as existing work that we're already doing around deconstruction and source separation, and trying to build a market here in the city. I want to hone in on that third action there, new and existing municipal buildings, which I'll go cover in the next slide, which covers structural and non-structural projects. And so in our municipal requirements, again, top line there, we have buildings requirements LEED 4.1 plus CalGreen. Under current development, I'm looking at infrastructure and non-structural work. That's where we lay a lot of concrete, steel, and asphalt, particularly from our infrastructure agencies, whether it's Port, SFO, and Public Works. SFO has $11 billion capital program ongoing right now, and our port has a whole waterfront resilience program will be over 13 billion between 2030 and 2050. So that is a lot of material that's going to be pulled. So I'm honing in on that. Next slide. So our municipal infrastructure, as I mentioned, we have our structural buildings, things that go vertical, and we've been doing work on that already for existing and new builds. Again, we have a Cal Green. We have design and construction guidelines that I'm working on establishing, and then working on establishing for our infrastructure agencies master material specifications. For the non-structural roads, it's similarly EPDs, guidelines, and material specifications. So I'm currently working on that and honing in on concrete and some asphalt right now. Sufficiency is sort of a new term I've kind of grabbed onto the last half year. It sort of comes out of the UN Sustainable Development Program, and basically that's we haven't implemented that, but I'm really interested in that is using less, speccing low, and offsetting what you can't. Next slide. So learn lessons, and I hope this will be my last slide, I think. Kind of what has been covered by everyone here is we learned that standardizing the practice is important. So whether they're material specification or design and construction standards, I think what was alluded to earlier is having communication occur across the design and construction phase. So this is environmental review built into the project schedule. Shout out to our SFO people who are leading the way. They build this out into their project schedule, and it's very helpful to get the conversation started early, during, and after. Learning that putting specifications and radiating those standards upfront in contracts so the people who bid know exactly what they're bidding on. It's even playing ground. And putting it in as performance-based standards always is important to the industry. Engaging early, like I said, at the conceptual, particularly in the conceptual design phase. Here in the city, we have a green building consultant and some lead practitioners, whether on staff or a consultant. So we're fortunate that way. I know some of you don't, but still having the conversation up front is important as you get involved in projects. Next. As we all know, ongoing engagement, training, and education is important to implement and to use the appropriate software and tools. So whether it's inspectors, code officials, project managers, owners, etc. Yeah, that'd be great. Next slide. Reduce the permit process, friction, and streamline compliance. We all know this. So again, whether it's templates and guidelines, easy to use checklists, and know that it's not going to stay static. You always got to work, right? Policies change, people and staff change. So making sure that's ongoing. Next bullet point. The Cal Green embodied carbon standard was fantastic and provides an opportunity for consistent-ish standards. As we know, all our local governments like to adopt amended codes to the standard ones set out by the state. Next slide. For San Francisco, we'd like to explore more aggressive triggers in Cal Green, not just sort of not the thresholds, but the actual triggers to get more qualifying projects in the pipeline. It's important that we actually look at that. So we're not just creating a policy and it covers no one. That would just be kind of the worst policy. So we got to look to see what's right size. Next. Um, we want to align, what I've learned is that we aligning capital infrastructure programs, as again, we have these $1 billion programs going across, aligning early with decision makers, those carbon reduction priorities. And that may not just be a policy, it also is just conversation and getting in the door and talking to people who are the decision makers. Next. Next. Oh, there you go. Again, performance-based compliance allows innovation and flexibility. I think we've heard that a lot when we engage with our industry and contractors and designers. Next. For us, circularity, we're focusing on that concept. It's not just carbon, it's also safe and healthy construction materials. So getting the win-win-wins when it comes to procuring these materials. Next. So thank you, and I'll finish off that the the sorry that for compliance, education and training is vital to what we do, but it's not the complete solution. Sometimes designers and contractors, from my experience, will need the enforcement itself to educate them. So us as practitioners being available to respond and fill those questions to, as Wes and the first panel had mentioned, increase the literacy across all our qualified projects. Thank you.